So, welcome everyone. Today's Thursday, December 19th, 2019. The time is 10:32 a.m. This is a special meeting to discuss facilities expansion funding and very specifically a contemplated building or two, if that's the case, down at on the downtown campus. Attending are Commissioners Duncan, Brooks, and Filios. We only have one business item, and that is the actual funding options for the new Kootenai County Administrative Building, if that's what we're calling it, but which I guess is fine for now. Do we have any changes to the agenda? Hearing none, I would like to welcome former County Commissioner Dave Stewart. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And of course, attending are Wally Jacobson of PAC and John Austin of Austin Consulting. And so, who would like to start? Dina, did you want to lead us off, or John?
Can I go?
Yeah, please do. Go right ahead.
I have to leave in about 15 minutes.
Go
So,
right ahead.
When we were in our last meeting, there was some conversation about, is it possible to take a step back, look at the space study, maybe look around and see if we could find some ways to revamp some of the existing space. So Greg and I went, and between the two of us, we know every place that is not used. And there's 978 square feet. That's it. That's not being used. And that's all in the annex. So, I mean, if there's a cubicle in the assessors or something like that, I'm not gonna count that, but I mean, that's all the space that is left. So, if you were to say, I know that Dina had brought up that the auditor's department, the way it's set up, isn't really functional, it's all in a long line. So if you were to just say, we're gonna remodel treasurer, recorder, and auditor, the problem that you're gonna have with that is you have no place to vacate to. With only 978 square feet, there's nowhere to go, unless you went to the Fairgrounds or something like that, but. So, my point being is, you know, I've been digging into the space study and just trying to take a look at it, and I don't know that you need the full 100,000 square feet. I think there's some things we might be able to do, although it's laid out pretty nice. But you're gonna have to decide at some point in time, the three of you, what you want to do. Because like 2 years, maybe a little over 2 years from design to move in. And I think if things continue down the path the way they are right now, you're gonna be in a crisis. Somebody's gonna have to move off campus again. Because there's nine little offices over in the annex, between floors, and if they get their judges, 5 of those are gone. They're gone. So now you're down to 4 10 by 12 offices. That's all you have left.
Okay.
Okay, so thanks for letting me share my 2 cents with
Okay.
Chris,
Yes, sir.
one thing, excuse me, this is not so much speaking to the particular item before us this morning, but in general, I said when we first started here, I would appreciate things at least 24 hours, maybe 48 hours in advance. When somebody slides a very, very important document in front of me as I walk into a meeting, it's complex. That's not okay. So, Jim.
It's your time.
Clerk Brennan, please.
Yes, I would state that all of this came about when Mr. Austin, who was not on the agenda, presented stuff to this Board of County Commissioners that no one had seen. So when we give you this, it's in response to what we saw there.
Did you not know this?
I did not know this until
Okay.
today.
Just
That
saying.
has been given to the board before.
Okay.
Yes, I recognize it.
This was given to the board when we first started talking about this. I just reprinted it
I've
so
got
you
a
have it for
completely
reference.
different format, but okay.
Yeah.
I just,
So I just wanted you to have it in front of you.
yes, please do that.
Fair enough. Okay. And Jim, to your point, John was invited.
Right.
And so, you know, he made his presentation, and that's correct. That was the first time we saw it, but he was certainly invited, and
Okay.
we'll leave it at that. Okay, so let's get back to the question of financing. As I look at this, okay, I see different options here. The question of bonding is not one that I think, that I'm under the impression we're gonna be taking up, because the question that was presented to us, and what looks to be the most viable solution here, is the idea that we would be, for lack of a better term, borrowing the money. When that was to start is debatable, whether it would start in '21 or '22, and that essentially the funding mechanism would be the multiple closure of URDs. So from there, and I'm trying to lead into this as best I can, is there seems to be some discrepancy or confusion or disagreement over what those figures are. Now, it is my understanding, and I've confirmed this, that there are multiple closures. It's not a single closure. The first is it the River District? It's the Coeur d'Alene District? What do we refer to it?
The Lake District.
The Lake District, okay, and then there are subsequent closures. So let's try to come to some common understanding of what it is we're looking at. So I'm gonna open it up. John, do you wanna go?
Well, I've got some numbers.
I've seen your pro forma, go ahead.
That I would like just to share with everybody, and then we can throw darts at it if we want.
Well, they
it-
just have a different point of view.
And what I've done, commissioners, is met with the urban renewal agencies that are closing. And where that was important was to see what are they receiving today.
Does Dina have a copy?
Yes, I can remember one last week.
Yes, please.
Okay, I can share if you need to.
She needs that.
Tina needs a copy, our clerk.
I don't need it.
Okay, it's okay.
Oh, you need to go, okay.
All right, good luck.
Okay, so Sean needs to leave, but thank you, Sean, appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Sean.
See you, Sean.
See ya.
If you don't mind my standing, I can shout.
No,
a
go
little
right,
better when I'm
why don't you
standing.
stand here, it might be easier. There you go,
So,
this way you can face everyone.
these are the numbers that have been given to me by the urban renewal agencies themselves, Tony Burns and Diane Fountain from Post
Okay.
Falls.
Okay,
So if you look at fiscal year 19 and 20, which is the very top line, the urban renewal agency this year will receive 5.5 million in tax increment. And that's something that, Rich can confirm, I'm sure, that that's what they're distributing to the agencies. If you look at the right-hand corner, that's the share the county is gonna get. If they closed today, you would get, based on your levy rate, which is 29% of the total, you would get 29% of that 5.5 million. You get 1.6 million if it closed today.
okay, go ahead.
Okay. What we've done is, Tony's estimate is that it's gonna increase no less than 5 or 6% over the next 3 years before refinance. And so I took a conservative 3% increase. Because remember, the dollars they get are the ones that you set for them. They don't have their own budget. Urban renewal agencies get whatever dollars you levy. So if you raise your budget 3% next year and the city raises theirs 3%, the lakes, and the other highway districts, of which I'm a commissioner, we're gonna raise our budget 3%. Then the dollars that flow have to increase by 3%. They simply have to, because people pay 3% more in taxes when you add that to your budget. And so conservatively, by '23, you'll have $1.7 million from Ignite. If you then look at Post Falls, they have 4 districts closing. In Coeur d'Alene, there's just one for the next 6 years. They have 4 districts closing. Next year, you'll receive your share of the $258,000 that's coming from the West CELTs. Next year, you'll get $80,000. The year after that, 74, 139, and 543. So another 837,000 within the next 2 years. So if you total those up, it's $2.6 million. And those are solid numbers. I've looked at the estimate from Rich, and I appreciate him calculating that. A couple of things I saw that were different on that is that he's projecting the levy rate to decline.
Okay,
We're using today's levy rate. But what makes the levy rate decline? Assessed value increase. That's the only thing that changes it, unless you cut your budget. And nobody that I know of is gonna cut their budgets next year. Nobody I know. So the only factor that would drive that down is if values go up. And he doesn't show the values increasing in the taxing district. So they have to stay constant, one or the other. if you're gonna lower the levy rate, use that as your estimate, you have to have the increased value that caused it to go down. So by using real dollars and your share of those real dollars, we know exactly how much you're gonna get. Now, whether it's 3% increase next year or the year after, that's up to you as commissioners, just like it's up to me as a commissioner in my district to raise taxes 3%. The other issue, and Steve brought it up, is do you want to dedicate all of your $2.6 million to this project? And that's a very valuable question. Are there other needs the county has? Do you want to give some back to the taxpayers and so forth? Those are very viable, important issues for you to make as commissioners, just as all elected officials in this room and elsewhere have to make. And so, because everybody in the county is gonna start getting some big chunks of urban renewal money the next 3 years. Look at the city's share. They get half of that money. So they're gonna get twice as much as you virtually, because their levy rate is such a bigger share than yours is. They get 52%. There's people even have run for office stating that they're gonna, the reason he ran for office was to make sure the money got spent the right way.
So what happens, John, if we're not taxing at the 3% level?
Then these numbers would be staying at the 1.6 million. If you quit today, if it closed today, if you de-annexed everything in the Lake District, if you could, you'd get $1.6 million next year added to your, that's a new construction roll. That's the amount you get to take every year when new construction comes on. The difference is that 700 million is built up over 24 years, so you haven't been able to take that. It's all been diverted to an urban renewal agency that I created and staffed 22 years ago. And so you've waited 24 years for this new increment to come to you. What of your needs have happened in those 22 years, which would be 24 years? Well, a lot of problems. You built a much smaller admin building than you needed 20 years ago, and you leased it the same way we're proposing now through a third party. And so we're not suggesting anything new. It's just that now, unlike 20 years ago when you had to divert money from other sources to pay for this building, now you've got that new source of income. Whether you opt to use all of it or part of it to fund the building, that's your question for today.
Okay, where I think I'm a little bit confused. So let's say we don't take 3%, say we did 1.5. Impact? Yeah, in future years. In other words, if we're not taxing at the 3% level, what's the impact in terms of what we're receiving from the closures?
Yeah, well then that would change.
Okay.
Obviously. It would increase by 1.5% for your share. I think the city's gonna continue to increase their budget 3%.
Okay.
Because they need it for salaries, mostly.
No, but what I mean in terms of, it sounds to me like there's a relationship between how we raise taxes and what we receive from the tax increment?
Correct.
From the closures? Okay, so if we tax at a 1% rate instead of a 3% rate next year, go ahead.
Yeah, then you wouldn't have the full 3% increase that I show.
Okay.
So the 1.7 in that fiscal year would be maybe more like 1.68 or something. So.
Okay.
So the projections are based on, and remember, it's not just what you do with your budget, it's also any new construction that comes in. And if you drive through Riverstone, which is where most of the increments come from in the Lake District, you'll see new homes being built and new businesses. So there's gonna be additional dollars anyway, which we haven't factored into this.
Okay.
But what I understand from the Ignite CDA is that it's very conservative to think that the tax dollars from that area will increase by at least 3%, regardless of what you do with your budget. So you gotta remember, those are the two factors that get you dollars. It's what you do with your own budget and what new construction comes on during that period.
Right.
So
Okay.
we think the numbers are conservative. The numbers from Diane are very conservative. And so based on that, the second page is what it will fund. And we just met with bond investors yesterday over the phone, and they said that the 3.8% rate is holding steady. That if we were to sell the bonds today, we could bring in not just the 24 million for the new building, but also $8 million in remodel costs, and cover that with their expected increment.
So for a total of 32 million.
32 million in bonds, correct?
Okay. Questions, Leslie, Bill?
Well, how does this relate to our borrowing ability?
This, just the same as when you built this building, the people that loaned you the money knew that at any point, a commissioner in the next fiscal year could fail to appropriate the lease payment. And then whoever loaned you the money would own this building.
Well,
So that's the risk, is that you can only allocate one-year leases for the next.
I must not have stated my question right. So this says that we have money to pay for a $32 million loan, but Steve has said before that we only can borrow 16 million based on.
And that was based on the assessor's figures, I think, that you'd only have 1.2 million in increment. And I don't have those numbers with me, but.
Okay.
So the factors that went into that calculation, I believe, are not entirely accurate, only because we know what the districts are receiving now. And it's not like they're gonna start paying less taxes just because they start flowing to you instead of the agency. They're gonna pay the same they are today, and you're gonna get your share of it based on what your levy rate is in relation to all of the levy rates. And so it's pretty fundamental. The other issue that was on the analysis from the assessor showed the base rate at $2,006, but the district was formed in 1997. So the base is really, goes back to 1997, and it was less than $100 million, I believe, was the base at the time. So just a couple of things that would adjust the numbers from the assessor that Steve looked at.
Okay. Dina, did you?
Okay, so just a couple of things. First of all, I had sent you some excerpts from statute and administrative rules. 2006 is the magic number. So if a URD, if part of a URD or an entire URD is de-annexed and closed, you can only take the increment back to 2006. Before 2006, you can't, that's not part of the calculation.
Where does the money go then? The tax?
It's not part of the calculation for bringing back that value. The other key point I want to say too, and I talked to the assessor, and he sent me an email and believes that we should wait until the upcoming legislative session, because we don't know if we're going to be able to use new growth at this point in time. So something that John said that I kind of want to clarify, and I'm going to ask the treasurer to weigh in on this too, is we keep talking about dollars coming back. It's not dollars that come back, it's value, taxable value that comes back. And we can only take that taxable value, put it in a new growth bucket, and then apply a rate to it. And that rate, over time, for almost 10 years, has consistently gone down, 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 because we're seeing our property values go up, 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 up. So every year that levy rate goes down, that bucket of value is going to have less money gleaned off of it for us to use. And two, when you think about it, when we start our budget, we have an estimate from the assessor of what we think our new growth is gonna be, and then that's adjusted again in May, and then it's adjusted again in July, and then it's adjusted again in September, during our entire budget process. And it can go all over the place. And that's just 1 year. If you're projecting out 4 years, 5 years, we have no idea what that money's gonna be. And I believe that the auditor feels very uncomfortable throwing numbers out. We don't know. I mean, we don't know what those numbers are gonna be. We don't know what our levy rate's gonna be. We don't know what the economy is gonna be. And we're not taking dollars back. This is not dollars, this is taxable
Value.
Then
value.
Dina, where do they go? If they don't come here to you, into the city, into the Lakes Highway District, where are those dollars gonna go? Are those people gonna pay less?
Those
than
dollars are
dollars.
created, those dollars are created by applying a rate. What we're dealing with is value. So the underlying value of those URDs that comes back to those districts is available to apply a rate to. And
just
depending
saying.
upon what that rate
I'm just
is,
saying, where does the 5.5 million go in 2 years?
we don't know if it's gonna be 5.5 million. We don't know what that number is.
You think
gonna
they're
be.
gonna pay less taxes between now and then?
we don't know what's gonna happen, and we don't know what that levy rate's gonna be.
But if you
Because
look at all
we've
the-
topped $20 billion of value
I'm
in
not
this
talking
county.
about the value, Dina, I'm talking about the very basic idea that if you look at all the parcels in the urban renewal district, and it's a big district, as you know it, it's not just River, Stone,
Sure.
it's Midtown, it's downtown, all those people, all those parcels, and we can have a parcel list printed out and look at what everybody's paying to the urban renewal district. Well, in 2 years, they're not gonna pay to the urban renewal district anymore. They're not gonna be diverted by the treasurer and assessor and by the auditor's office to the agency. Those parcels, every dollar they're paying is gonna come to you guys. So it has to be based on dollars. The value goes up and down, the levy rate goes up and down, mostly down, because the values are going up.
Mhm.
The real calculation, when you write your check to Steve, and I just wrote mine to Steve, it's due in 2 days, you get it. It's based on what the taxes levied by the taxing districts, every one of them. And then you divide that by whatever the value of my house is, all the houses, and that's how you get my taxes. And I'm gonna send that money to Steve, or I'm gonna send it to, and he distributes it to wherever the statute and the established districts say to send it. In 3 years, he's no longer gonna send it to Tony Burns, he's gonna send it 29% of it to you guys. So whatever dollars are being paid by every parcel in the district, and again, we can print out the entire parcel list, it wouldn't be hard to do that, add up all the dollars that everybody in the district's paying, and realize that those dollars are now gonna come to you on your share of the levy rate, which right now is 29%. It might be 28%, or it might be 30%, depending on how you levy, based on how much your, the city levies and so forth. But I think conservatively, you're gonna get a big chunk of money in 2 years, and I think you can dedicate it to this purpose.
Maybe.
Maybe,
Maybe.
depends on legislation. So I talked to Mike Moyle, who's the senior majority House leader, and he is proposing legislation that you get new growth, or counties can tax on new growth or 3%, not both. That's what is being looked at in this legislative session.
Okay.
So that's a really precarious spot that puts the counties in.
Right.
And so it's difficult for me to, yes, I believe we will get dollars back, and I believe that, you know, depending on how valuation goes, how there's a downturn in the market, all those kinds of things are gonna factor in. But I'm very uncomfortable until this legislative session is over,
I understand.
figuring out, you know, what's gonna be available
And
to
we can
us.
certainly go back and just use today's dollars. We can use the 1.6 million, and just determine how much that can buy you, instead of the 1.78. I guarantee you today, if it closed, you'd get 1.7 million, $1.6 million. Because the dollars are going somewhere, they gotta still come somewhere. People aren't gonna pay less just because the levy rate changed, or because their value changed. They're gonna pay based on what you levy for them to pay.
Dina?
I would just say too that every year we do a budget, and government finance is kind of backwards from private sector. So our levy rate is driven by our budget. So we start with expenses and we back into revenue. So that levy rate is gonna fluctuate based on the size of our budget and how much taxes we need to collect. So that's why it fluctuates. So say we didn't take the new growth, say we just levied 3% against our prior year taxes, all of that growth just goes into one giant number, and all that does is affects the levy rate. You can't actually glean dollars. After it hits that big bucket of money, after it goes through the new growth
Right,
phase and
right.
lands in that big bucket of money, and you're limited to how much that you can tax. So, to me, I'm not, just personally and as finance director, I'm not comfortable with these projections, because I feel like they're kind of, the money, I mean, it's very loose. And I wouldn't recommend counting on those dollars to pay back a loan at this point. And I know that the treasurer has some comments too and some ideas. And I'd like for him to speak too, because he speaks with authority and he understands these things. And the assessor apologizes for not being here, but he also believes, as Commissioner Duncan does, that we shouldn't make any decisions until we know what's gonna happen in the legislature and what our funding sources are going to look like.
Okay.
I don't think you guys are scheduled to make any decisions today. I think this is just kind of gaining
Yeah, this
some
is discussion.
understanding of
Mhm.
what's going on. If I can attempt to maybe clarify these discrepant opinions.
Mhm.
Obviously, the treasurer has no say in this, so this is from the cheat sheets, right? The assessor determines new growth, right? And the clerk determines what our budget is. The discrepancy that I see is that Mr. Austin is calculating what our expected cash flows might be at the closure of a URD based on the existing cash flows that the URD are receiving, and multiplying it by a percentage. By statute and by rule, that's not how we can calculate what our cash flow will be going forward after the URD closes. The methodology that we have to use is go through our maximum budget authority, and we go through a process. And that process determines how much property tax dollars that we can collect each and every year.
Okay.
So, on one side, Dean is describing how we calculate our maximum taxing authority, which will contemplate new growth as a result of the closure of the URD. And Mr. Austin over here is calculating it based on the actual tax dollars being received by the URD, and at the expiration of that URD, those tax dollars have to go somewhere. And I don't believe that's correct, because the way that we calculate what we're statutorily authorized to collect in property taxes is determined a completely different way. That's elaborated in not only statute, but by regulation that the tax commission authors. And that's the, I think, the discrepancy. If you follow what I believe is correct, the actual number based on what the assessor is using, and again, I don't determine this, but what the assessor is determining, I believe the number is closer to 1.3 million.
Okay.
And those are the restrictions that are imposed on the taxing authority, being Kootenai County, and how much they can increase their authorized tax collection from year to year.
So when you say 1.3, that would be, so that we're all on the same page, because this can get very confusing, as opposed to the roughly 1.6 plus that John is indicating.
If we're just focusing on the closure of the lakes, you are.
Precisely,
Yes.
precisely.
Correct.
So if you are correct, and that same principle or the same logic holds for the subsequent closures, there are subsequent closures, we can all agree on that,
Yes.
then those dollars would be potentially reduced as well.
Correct. I would
Okay.
make that assumption. Yes.
Okay, so instead of the 2.623 that John has, maybe it's, I don't know, 2.1?
There's a lot of assumptions making, the additional closures that are occurring in the future, the farther out you go in the future, the less reliable those estimates are gonna be.
No question, no
So
question.
I would hesitate to speculate what that amount might be if we're going 3, 4, 5, 6 years in the future. Yes, we can make some assumptions and put it on a piece of paper and come up with an answer. But now there's a longer period of time that we're trying to factor in what might happen. Leslie has mentioned, Commissioner has mentioned that there's legislation that is growing momentum regarding property tax collection authorities. I say it's probably 50-50, that will probably either pass this year or next, which will then eliminate the possibility for us to collect those future possible dollars at the expiry of it at URD, as well as we could capture the 1.3 million and let's say we get it in under the wire, so to speak, before legislation changes,
Mhm.
that doesn't impact our bonding ability because that cash flow stream that we're trying to capture may go away or be reduced significantly. It's not determined based on whether we have debt issued or not. So if we have that debt outstanding and the laws change, the cash flows will be reduced and our debt obligation remains in place. So at that case, you guys will be scrambling, how do we come up with the cash flow to support that debt obligation that we issued on the presumption that we would continue to have those future
Oh,
cash
understood,
flows?
understood. But that's also like saying recessions happen and they'll last forever. I mean, and I've done sufficient planning in my life to realize that you're absolutely right. The further out you go, the more variable, the lesser the accuracy, but the fact of the matter is, when you plan, you have to make certain assumptions.
Agreed.
And you did say earlier that even with that debt obligation, it doesn't necessarily, I shouldn't say impact, but harm our bonding ability. Not that I want to bond for it, but
No, it would not,
it wouldn't have,
because you guys have the authority through a lot of different
Right,
mechanisms to create cash flows to support any debt
Right.
obligation that you might have out there.
correct,
Um,
okay.
You got the 3%, you currently have the new growth, you have foregone, you have borrowing, debt issuances, voter approved, so to speak. You have emergency overrides, you have permanent overrides, you have temporary overrides. You have the ability to create the cash flow.
Okay.
And that's why it might be important for us to just begin to delineate, because we have two different questions here. We have, do we need space?
Yes,
Okay. And then the second question is, how are we gonna fund it?
correct.
So then, I have a
Go ahead.
question, I don't know, anybody can answer this. So if the value went back to the base, and so we're not going to realize this 1.2 to 1.6 million in our hands, right? But then wouldn't that be able to reduce taxes to a point where maybe a bond is gonna be a wash if we did decide to do voter-approved bond? Does that sound reasonable?
Well, in theory, if your base is bigger, that means everybody's proportionate share of
Drops.
taxes drops.
Mhm.
But it's lumpy because people
Right.
live over different districts and everything, but in general, the bigger pool you have, that bigger, denominator that you have,
Right.
everybody's share is smaller, yes.
John?
Chairman, I wonder if we could just go back 2 years and somebody could confirm the numbers. The Lake District and the River District did what's called a de-annexation. The city of Coeur d'Alene went to the districts, Ignite, and said, we need 7 new firefighters. So we want our increment today. So they got the law changed, and former Senator Hammond got the law changed. He was city administrator. And they de-annexed some $1 million worth of funds from the Lake and River District. So they took their money now. They didn't want to wait. It didn't make Ignite real happy because they had to do without that money. But they did it. And when they did that, they also got a big chunk for the county. So I would like to see how that impacted your budget from a couple of years ago. I'd like to see, because all that new construction came to you then, rather than having to wait for 2 years. I'm not suggesting you go and de-annex anything. I'm just saying that would give you a model to look at. How are those dollars distributed between the county, the city, highway districts, and so forth? I would just like to know that.
Well,
And that would make you feel better, Steve.
right,
on how it-
I understand that, and I think the combined total that the city received was actually closer to about 1.2 million. 1.2 million is the increased taxing authority that they're authorized to increase their budget from year to year, going through the process of establishing the budget. They don't get that tax flow stream just through the de-annexation. They still have to go through the budget process to create
Yeah.
the authorization to receive that.
Yeah, the county did not have to add that to your budget. You did not have to. You don't have to add this 1 point, whatever it is either. You can give all it back to the taxpayers if you want.
Well,
But if you don't levy it, it goes into your foregone account, and then you can.
No,
levy it.
there's a
No,
disconnect
that's
between
two
the
different
loan and the
things.
It's value,
Sure
it's
it
not
is.
money, it's value.
Yeah.
No, it's dollars. These dollars came to the city, and they came to you. And just go back and look at your L2 if you'd like, Deanna, and you'll see that you were given a big chunk of new construction that you got to add to your budget.
We had, yes, we had an increase in the actual amount of new construction that when you go through the actual budget process, you can capture it. But the argument you're making does not comply with Idaho statutes or the tax rules issued by the State Tax Commission or the personnel within the State Tax Commission who have looked at it. They all agree that the way that the county is approaching the actual amount of potential cash flows that we might be able to capture through the budget process after the expiry of the actual URD is the $1.3 million is a closer number for the actual Lakes District closure. So I'd be happy to sit down and kind of go over my thought process with you as well as the tax commissions. But there's a disconnect here.
Sure. All I'd like to do is just go back and look at that it was just 2 years ago. It wouldn't be that hard to go back and look at where all those parcels started paying their taxes. Because they no longer went to Ignite, they came to you, they came to the city.
But again, John, each of those taxing authorities have to go through a budget process
Sure.
to capture those tax dollars that you think are gonna be automatically generated. They're not automatically
No,
generated.
you have to add them to your budget. They have to go on your L2. I've been doing this for 32 years, I know how the L2s work. They give you every parcel that we de-annexed. And PAC did the study, I did the de-annexation for PAC. Every one of those parcels that came out of the district early, instead of those dollars going to Ignite, they came to you and the city chiefly. And it'd be really easy to look and see what the state tax
We have to do
commission
that,
said.
but we
Add it to
have
your
to just stop and agree to disagree. I think you're factually wrong. I think that we can sit and talk about it. I don't think in a public setting or a public
Sure.
meeting is probably.
Yeah, why don't you guys get together,
That'd
okay?
be fine. I can bring the
Can we
parcel list.
participate as well?
That'd be great.
That's up to you guys, yeah,
I can
absolutely.
bring the parcel list that was de-annexed. It'll show you all the dollars that the people were paying that now came.
So, but just so that we understand, even though we're not gonna take this discussion any further today, where is the point of disagreement?
The point of disagreement is that John is assuming or making the assertion that he can take the allocated tax increment that is flowing to the URDs currently, solve for a percentage that the county's levy rate is using to calculate those existing cash flows, and that through the expiration of the URD, those existing cash flows are going to come to us automatically. And that's not how it works.
They have to be added to the budget.
Right, but what I also understand is, okay, so let's say that we have this increment coming back to us, and let's say that we do another $1 billion in valuation, new growth, right? Well, then that is going to lower the levy rate even more, so we're not gonna have that cash, that 1.2, 1.6, whatever, that's not gonna be realized, because it's gonna be by a lower levy rate.
But the value will be higher,
But the value will be higher.
because you've added,
And that's not
700
even
million
relevant to the
value.
whole
Yeah, it's
conversation
not,
we're having.
it's not.
you've added 700 million in value to your tax base.
Let me ask a different question. But maybe, no, it's not different, it's related. But the thing, when we talk about the possibility of of new growth going away, as Rich Hauser explained it, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page here, essentially, the loss is in that first year. It's a deferral. But at some point, those join the tax roll and become taxable properties.
They do, but we are then limited to 3%.
You can only take 3%.
Plus the new construction.
Well,
Not if
no,
the new
not
construction goes
if,
away.
not if the new construction goes
The
away.
new construction
So what
goes
happens
away.
is our base becomes wider and people pay less.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
if you
doesn't
don't
generate more
add, if
money.
you don't add a new building going on right there, if you don't add that $20 million onto your tax roll, because it's new construction, you don't get to take it, then the taxes they
But wait a
pay
minute.
will get distributed amongst all the.
But
other
when you
people
say,
in the
this is what I want to understand, when you say we don't take it, at some point, that joins the tax rolls and we do take it.
The value is gonna join it.
Sure.
I'm sure the assessor's gonna bring them on the tax roll.
Well, precisely.
Yeah, but if you can't take that, the taxes those people are paying onto your budget, it's gonna drive your levy way down.
But
And everybody in the county gets a break.
So
That
this,
is-
yes, so
Yes.
this, so I think we're all coming together at the same spot now, because it's not a rate against the value. It's a rate against what you took the prior year. You can't just take a rate against all the values. You're limited to that
So really what
3%
I-
of your prior year.
So in the net, what I'm hearing is that the figures may not be as high as we think they are. It's not a question of whether or not, and correct me if I'm wrong now, that it's not a question of whether or not we're gonna collect the increment. The question is how much increment are we gonna collect?
No.
No?
No.
It's how much you wanna budget next year.
Well, that's the,
Yeah.
okay, yeah,
It's-
okay,
it's-
that's the
it's
next step.
expense
Increment will be
driven, it's
collected.
expense driven, it's not revenue driven, it's expense driven, so you back into it, you have this
Yeah.
budget amount and then you
Okay,
back
fair
into
enough.
it.
Okay,
All
no.
budgets should be expense driven, all
Okay,
budgets.
well, yeah, right,
I do them for 10 different districts right now.
which is unlike the private sector, which I think has been said over and over again. Here are a couple of things that I, okay, first is, well, I guess my question was answered. Okay, so the second point that I want to make, and I can't go too far with this because part of it touches on executive session, but there was a former county commissioner, I'll be very frank, it was Mark Everline, and this is not a knock, it's not intended to be that way, so don't take it this way, but had advanced a proposal to move the whole campus, never mind consolidating justice services, it was the entire campus. Clearly, that would have cost us far more than 30 or 35 or 40 million bucks, okay? During that discussion, and we never looked at the tax increment, that never came into the discussion. It never occurred, never was it brought up that we didn't have the money. Steve, you had this discussion with him. It never occurred, it never seemed that it was unaffordable. Here, we're looking at a tax increment that has a good chance of coming into us, whatever that figure is, and we're looking at the potential for new growth to go or whatever, and all of a sudden, we have these heightened concerns, and I'm gonna come back to that. By the way, I am not gonna allow this process to become politicized, let's get it straight right here. So, let me ask you,
How
Steve.
are you saying, are you suggesting that I'm politicizing this?
No, not you. I'll come back to that.
Okay.
Relax, okay? What I'm saying is, there was no concern expressed at that time as to whether that relocation was affordable.
Okay, let me explain something that maybe I haven't been clear on. The county, through the mechanisms that you three control, and I've talked about bonding,
Yes,
I've talked about overrides, permanent and temporary. I've talked about a number of foregone. If you were to capture the foregone, just alone, you guys could borrow $100 million, probably more like 125, just capturing the foregone. So, you guys could go out and buy and purchase anything you want. Affordability is not the issue here. You guys.
no,
can-
go ahead, keep going.
That's what I'm saying. So, when Mark was going out and talking about buying property up at a certain location, and it's 25, 35, 45, 50 million, 125 million, the county can afford that. So affordability is not the issue.
That's right.
Okay. Fair enough.
The political question, is that the right thing to do? Is that-
Well, no, and.
I'm not even gonna touch that. with
No, I
you.
don't want you to touch that, but I'm gonna make a point right here. And you guys can take it or leave it as you wish. But the fact of the matter is, when the discussion came up of going up to the fairgrounds, I didn't hear the objections. Now that the decision was made to keep it downtown, I'm hearing, well, maybe we shouldn't even do this. Why? You don't have to answer it, but it makes me a little suspicious. And as I said, I'm not gonna allow this to become politicized.
I know why.
I'll take that as.
That's not intended for you.
Okay.
Don't. You answered my question, you answered it, and I'm fine with it. And it is exactly as I understood it. So you're okay, Steve, it's not, okay.
No, I know why, because it's the part of the process. We would have the same discussion right now if we were building at the fairgrounds. Where's the money gonna come from?
That's right.
Same thing. I would expect this exact same conversation if we were looking at the fairgrounds. It's, we need space. How are we gonna pay for space? This is where we're at. I don't see any difference how it would be not talked about, I mean, where's that unicorn money coming from just because it's in a different location? We still have to figure out how to pay for new construction, a new building. So to me, this is not, has nothing to do with where it is.
Care to comment?
Well, I think we've decided to be here, so, and we need to figure out how to pay for it. And before we make any moves, we need to know that the source of the monies to pay for it is certain and not in question. I think everybody, hopefully, everybody would agree with that one.
Any other thoughts?
Since we're on a roll, I'm just gonna
On a
reiterate.
roll. Is this a roll?
Yesterday, we spoke at the elected officials meeting to, one of the highest priorities next year is going to be possibly the cost of living adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
Cost of living adjustment, using the most recent social security figure of 1.6 is gonna cost us 800 grand. We also talked about salary increases through matrix,
Mhm.
as well as a step in grade and all that. I have no idea what that's going to be. The dollar is limited on what you're gonna be able to spend this money on.
True.
Right. And I just wanna make sure that before we go down a path of indebtedness or bonding, that you have, and Chris, I know that you were crystal clear in your mind what you wanna do, and I appreciate that. That the highest priority of those additional tax dollars that we can collect next year and in the future are best suited for the construction of the building. And if that's the answer collectively, which I believe it's the majority, great, let's move forward.
Sure enough.
Okay.
I appreciate that. Any other comments? Okay, as I said, I want to reiterate what I said earlier. I don't want to see this become politicized. Okay? I want to try to make, an objective decision, and let's leave it at that.
Chairman,
Yes,
would it
sir.
be okay if we met with staff?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'd really like to see the projections
Yeah.
that they have.
Again, this is, I guess I'm a little bit weird, probably shouldn't say this, but please don't refer to me as staff or the other elected officials. Thank you.
Okay, I don't think he was intending anything offensive by that, but
I
that's
know he
okay.
wasn't, but
No.
it's just a.
Okay.
No. I'm an elected official too, and I don't like being called staff, so appreciate that.
Okay, I've been called far worse, so it's
So,
okay. Public comment. Dave, please.
Thank you for this. I think I may be able to answer your question, Commissioner Filius, as far as Mark Everling. When I was a commissioner, through my discussions with Mark, his idea was, or one of his ideas was to sell the real property downtown here.
Yes.
And that was a means of
Yes.
kind of funding what he wanted to do out at the fairgrounds. And so I know we had lengthy discussions over that, including this whole area here and also the old, I guess, be federal building down the road. So anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, we actually had a cursory analysis that was done by Parkwood Properties, and this is public actually. And because of the challenges and the cost of repurposing these buildings, that figure came to a little just over $3 million, which was a bit of a shock to most of us, but that was their assessment.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right.
I just wanted to share.
Thank you. Anything else? No? 11:21, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.